Hello, my name is Kathy Kelly, and I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development at the Delaware Department of Education. Welcome to our final What's Up Wednesday session on how you can join us in our Delaware Delivers campaign and promote the great work happening around high-quality instructional materials on social media. If this is your first What's Up Wednesday session or your fourth, thank you for joining us in learning more about how Delaware educators are making instructional moves and curricular decisions that are changing outcomes for their students and families. Before I introduce our facilitators for today's session, I wanted to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. Keep your phone or computer on mute at all times. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat box and we will pause periodically throughout the session to address them. We may not get to everyone's questions today, and therefore you can follow up with us at the email we will provide at the end of the call today, or you can request a member of our team to reach out to you at any time this week or anytime after that. Just a note, today's session is being recorded for posting on our Digital Delaware website. So let's meet our facilitators. I'm Kathy Kelly, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development.
I'm Karen Bates, and I lead communications at Standards Work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Janice Lane. I am the newly exited Executive Director of Teaching and Learning in City Schools, so working on a consulting frame right now.
And hello, everybody. My name is Ashley Giska. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning in the Laurel School District in Delaware.
Thank you, everyone. So glad you're here today. Let's just take a moment to discuss our objectives for today's session. By the end of this session, participants will be able to find the high-quality curriculum conversations happening in social media, and participants will also be able to join the Delaware Delivers conversation on Twitter. Now I'm going to turn it over to Karen to walk us through the agenda for today.
Thanks, Kathy. This is a conversation that we really love having because the work that is happening in Delaware districts like Laurel and in districts around the country like Baltimore City is so important. And as someone who lives in neither of those states, I still get to see into the exciting work happening in Laurel and Seaford and Brandywine and Baltimore City, compliments of social media. And it turns out that, I'm not alone in having found social media to be a key way that my own awareness of high quality instructional materials and their effectiveness and their power, has been. It turns out that also when you talk to educators around the country, and as Janice will share with us, social media has been a really important lever for helping to spread this word. So we're excited to talk about that today. And we're excited to talk with the Delaware community about how you can help, because the beauty of social media is we all can play a role with our devices and our liking thumbs in building buzz about important work. So today we'll talk about why this work matters so much. We'll talk about how you can find those curriculum conversations in Twitter, and in particular, the Delaware Delivers campaign and that hashtag, and how you can find the Delaware specific conversation. We'll talk about amplifying Delaware stories, and Ashley will be kind enough to give us some amazing Delaware stories that'll give us a chance to amplify in real time. So don't let your phone or your device be too far away, because we'll be giving you phenomenal stories that need more telling. And then we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So I echo Kathy, definitely keep those questions coming in the chat. So it's my pleasure to introduce Janice, whose work, the amazing work happening in Baltimore City, has been reflected in social media, and we'll see some glimpses here.
Great. Thank you, Karen. I think, first, thanks for having me join this conversation. I have been following the story of Delaware, as Karen said. Feel like I have visited your classrooms, talked to your leaders, see what your teachers think and feel about your curriculum. And I think that is most exciting. So thanks for the invitation to be here and talk today. We have spent the past 4 years with high quality curriculum implementation in Baltimore City Public Schools. And I think one of the things that has really garnered the work around that has been social media. And I have to say to you, in the beginning, when I first met Karen and she was talking to us and she was saying, you're not good at telling your own story. And I was like, yeah, we talk all the time. Then I understood exactly what she meant as I started engaging. I was a little nervous at first because I was tech savvy, but I hadn't used Twitter before, but then really got into it and started to see that it actually builds a community. And it's this way of really networking with people that don't always get to talk to one another. So by that, I mean folks that sit in a seat like I sat or where Ashley sits sometimes aren't in the conversations with district superintendents or other folks that are a learning community. So building this community together was really helpful. It really took hold that people were building confidence together. Some of the tweets you see sitting in front of you are from the first one's from a principal in one of our schools, really elevating the story. And I know that you all know principals listen to principals. There's often the question of, at least in Baltimore, what about central office? Have you taught this curriculum? Have you done this? But if another principal is elevating work that's happening, it really builds the camaraderie and the networking across those folks. And the same on the far right, you see two teachers in the center really talking about not just the curriculum's great, but talking about what do you make sense out of that? Sharing samples of student work, sharing excitement, knowing that there's a kindergarten teacher who's saying we use wit and wisdom, who was saying geodes are the greatest things in the world, right? And I can tell you, I taught first grade a million moons ago. If we had geodes then, I would have been dancing every day in my classroom. And so this teacher was sharing that excitement of what does it look like and feel like in a kindergarten classroom. And another teacher, tweeting here, you can see pictures. So you actually get insight into the actual work that's happening. And it's, again, this way that, again, as Karen said, you can hashtag or do your @ here so that you can tag people into the conversation. So you can actually see in the middle one, it gave me a chance as a central office person to build deeper relationships with teachers, which is hard to do, right? Because in Baltimore, we spent a lot of time spending in meetings in other places where I wasn't always in schools. But you can see on that tweet from Jen Windler, the first person to respond was me about the geode. So building this ongoing relationship was really important. It also built a place for public conversation to happen. You can see on the far right is our CEO, Dr. Sonia Santelises. And there she was engaged in a webinar chat, really talking about the curriculum, why we have it, what it's about. It also allowed us to create this space for folks to start asking questions. Folks that weren't using HQIMs, like, why are you seeing results like you are? Starting to really understand that this was an equity issue that we all owe to our students, to our teachers, to our community. So it was this great way to think about how we could, as a community, really build the awareness and really put the charge out for folks that this is what has to happen. I often say that the curriculum is the foundation. So it's not a scripted program. It's not something that people have to follow word by word, but it creates the floor that brings equity to every classroom. And then teachers can build on that and develop. And so what you'll see on the next one was actually a really cool networking opportunity that Sumner County in Tennessee was following our messaging, our postings, our information on wit and wisdom, because as they were doing a curriculum adoption, wit and wisdom was one of their top runners. They reached out to us. They came to Baltimore. They spent time in classrooms. They spent time talking to principals. They spent time talking to students and really just getting a feel for what did the curriculum look like. And you'll see on the right, this idea of a new network of colleagues. So the leader, Scott Langford, we chat all the time about what are you planning to do for this? What does the teacher PD look like? What are you hearing? And it brings this other wonderful experience to really network us as leaders and what happens. What's been amazing across this work is that it doesn't really matter if you're doing wit and wisdom, if you're doing bookworms, if you're doing EL. What matters is it's at HQIM. And then what happens is you start talking about the implementation, because high quality professional learning is specific enough to your district And we're doing across this work ways to coordinate there. So really pushing to other folks to say, you know what, how are you building teacher leadership? How are you really building voice? And the next slide will also show you that that was a gift to us in Baltimore. We had a couple of teachers who were our early adopters into Twitter and started talking about this work. One was our teacher of the year, Kier Butts. You'll see his entry on the far left. He has his own following, right? Everybody knows Kier in the Twitter sphere. Everybody knows Katie Scotty, another person on here, because they were elevating and sharing their work, but they were also being transparent. They were stepping into leadership to say, look at the writing that you see on the left. This has changed. And we've been able to spend some time in those classrooms really elevating this story, where Kier said in the beginning, I didn't think this was going to work, right? This was something somebody said will help us in Baltimore, but I didn't believe it until I went to the PD. And then I started going into the learning and unpacking and really building out what was happening, what was working within that. So it creates this opportunity for teachers to share with other teachers and to really, again, put a lens on the work that elevates our teacher leadership. So some of our teachers got involved with Wit and Wisdom to be teaching experts, to get additional training, to do things that really build the community and enhance the implementation across. We were also able to really partner with Curriculum Matters and really think about what does this look like, so that topics that were relevant to Baltimore became topics that we discussed with others within that community. So the teacher that I spoke about, Katie Scotty, is an absolute rock star. We did a Zoom chat. I would say I was just hanging out in Zoom while Katie was really sharing the amazing work she does to scaffold within the curriculum, and then layering on what do we as district leaders do with that to help our teachers do the best that they can do for students every day. And also, finally, there was a chance for an ELA chat, a Twitter chat, which was, they've been really fun. I will say to you, at first I was like, what is this going to be? But it's this great opportunity to sit back, chill out, and just answer questions on Twitter and exchange with people. And it's amazing the people that are on Twitter. I think one thing that I didn't mention, one time at the scaffolding session that we did, Katie was texting me and said, is there anybody on here I'm going to know? And I knew Natalie Wexler was joining. And I was like, I'm not going to tell her that until afterwards, right? But somebody like Natalie Wexler, who is a lead researcher, believer in HQIMs, knows what we need to do around knowledge building and consistency for kids. She was joining this, and we were having a conversation as if Natalie was in this very small group with us right now. And that afforded Baltimore a lot of liability, whatever you want to say that word, to really come in. When we had experts come to a convening, Natalie came. And she came and she talked to our teachers. She knew the story of what was going on in Baltimore. So it also opens up the world to a lot of folks that you may not have access to in other ways. So, you know, having Tim Shanahan respond, having Natalie Wexler engage, Nell Duke, David Lieben, Meredith Lieben, all of those folks really not just dipping in and saying a word, but lending their leadership to help build our implementation and our understanding there. So for us in Baltimore, it was a great way to elevate the story, not the story of Baltimore, but the story of our teachers and our students, which I think you can't get any better than that. But it created this amazing, I know I've said it 300 times, network. But we would go to places and people would, you know, at a conference, somebody would say, aren't you from Baltimore? And you guys do blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking, I'm not sure I've ever met you before. But then when we started talking, it was this Twitter group. And it has created these relationships where somebody like Ashley and myself, or Robin McClellan or Scott Langford, really can just jump on at any given moment and put our brains together to figure out what's best, not just for our students, but for all students. So I would say it is given us a gift that I didn't know was around for us, but it has really created those spaces to elevate stories.
Thank you, Janice. I love these stories, and I also love the ways that you know, it is easy in this work, and I'm about to shift back to talking about this. It's easy in this work to think about how does social media and how does the positive storytelling coming out of Baltimore City, Laurel, Seaford, et cetera, you know, how does that help persuade new educators to think about going on this curriculum journey? And Until we have high quality curricula in all classrooms, I can't stop, won't stop thinking about that. But I also love the ways that Janice's stories really emphasize the other reason that Twitter has taken off among educators, and it is that professional learning angle. I'll take a second to share one of my favorite stories from my own visit to Baltimore when Janice was kind enough to host me, and she took me to these two magical places, Katie and Kier's classroom. And in Kier's classroom, he shared a story about the first year that Baltimore City was using Wit and Wisdom. And there were some teachers who were, of course, a little hesitant, right? You know, no curriculum adoption is something where every teacher is like, you know, chomping at the bit to change curricula going into that. And Kier told a story about how he had tweeted a tweet very similar to the one we're looking at here, where he had tweeted some student work for one of his students. He's a 6th grade ELA teacher. And a 5th grade teacher in his very same building came up to him and said, I had that student last year and I saw that essay that you shared. How are you getting him writing like that? This is a teacher in his own building, but we all know PLC time is too much at a premium, and every teacher is too much of his or her own island, right? It can be so hard to get into each other's classrooms and see each other's teaching, but this was a way that social media provided a vehicle for them to have a valuable conversation about writing practice that wouldn't have happened without Twitter. So thank you, Janice, for all of the angles that you just shared here. And so this, hopefully, Janice's story is explained better than anything that I could tell you about Twitter and why it's so important. But I did want to take a second to dwell on why we're going to talk so much about Twitter today as opposed to the other platforms. And first and foremost, it's because it's the most open one. Yes, I know that more Americans are in Facebook than in Twitter. And yes, I also know that, you know, Instagram is increasingly popular. And now we've got the new TikToks with the young people. But Twitter has emerged as effectively America's public square. Our presidents increasingly make it the place that they bring their own voice and debut important information. Practically every journalist is there trying to figure out what the public read is on important topics. And as of the last stat that I saw, more than 40% of US educators have a Twitter account. And that's a dusty stat, so I can only assume that it's more than 50%, which is true for most Americans. So it is the place to be sharing our stories, because not only is it what differentiates it from the others is that it's so open. The overwhelming majority of users, more than 99%, do have unlocked accounts, which is how Scott in Sumner County could see what Janice was saying up in Baltimore City. As much as those other platforms have great traction, most people have more locked private accounts. And so you've got to be a part of the right group to be, or you've got to be connected with someone to know what they're saying. In Twitter, you can kind of get there and find it all. And we're going to talk about how today. So it has been this powerful way that we can get this window into districts. And, you know, I always have to go back to a reality check in this work that's good for all of us to reflect on. I, as a current non-educator, reflect on it all the time. That if there's one thing we know about educators, it's that they deeply trust other educators. And they don't tend to have the highest degree of trust for anybody else or any other, you know, category of type of person. It's not that you can't become, you know, a trusted source for an educator, but if you're not sitting in a district seat right now or you know, working in a school right now, you've got your work cut out for you to become that trusted partner. Whereas Scott Langford, a district leader in Tennessee, is naturally going to trust that Janice Lane or Ashley Giska, as fellow district leaders, that they know something that he can learn from, and that native trust is going to be there. So that's why it's so valuable that Twitter is this platform where not only can we be sharing stories, and, you know, I, Karen, a curriculum advocate, can talk about curriculum work, and the Delaware Department of Education is increasingly talking about this curriculum work. But the beautiful thing is that educators themselves bring the important stories of this work. And this is a couple of tweets from Delaware educators just from the last few weeks alone, where, you know, we have Cora in Baltimore, you know, sharing out about a webinar and cheering the work happening in her district. And Lavina, one of her colleagues, is replying and talking about, you know, how honored she is and how proud she is to be a part of this team. We have, Chris, who's also in Brandywine, talking about a specific detail about the curriculum and how impactful it is for instruction. We have Jen here. When her work gets shouted out or her district's work gets shouted out in a case study, she's sharing that case study about the curriculum work there in Baltimore, but also talking about how fortunate she is to have this curriculum. And again, there's a halo of trust that's going to come with those comments that's better than anything we can do. So what's the role that we play in that, and how do we help foster that? Well, one thing we also know about social media, people share in part because they like knowing that someone's listening and they like those likes. I have no doubt that it felt really good for Jennifer that the day that she shared that piece, that 25 people liked it, 5 people retweeted it, and someone quote tweeted it. All of that encouragement, that implied encouragement, that upvoting, that's going to make her a lot more likely to share that next time that something awesome is happening in her classrooms. So, when as this conversation goes on, we're going to shift to how do we share those stories? How do we cheer those educators? And how do we, what role can we play in making these conversations continue to happen? But if there's one thing that I would leave you with, for those of you that feel like, okay, I'm sure there's somebody here listening who's like, I'm not exactly a social guru. This isn't exactly always my thing. You can, with this device, before bedtime, or literally in the grocery line, by the end of this session, you'll know how you can amplify those wonderful tweets from educators, from the department, from those cheering the work of educators, because just your likes alone can help to sort of power this work. And that brings me to my favorite thing to say about Twitter. It's also true of other social platforms. What sits behind them is one big algorithm. And we all know the principle of going viral, that if something gets posted, the more likes it starts to accrue, the more people are going to see it. And then the more likes it will likely accrue, or the more reactions, the more replies, the more comments. So that's how you can be helpful, again, in the grocery line. Just with your liking thumb, skimming the posts, and we'll talk in a second about how you find those great Delaware posts, skimming those posts, liking, pressing that retweet button, you play into the effect of making sure that these stories go ever more viral, and you can help build that awareness without even ever writing a tweet. So how do you find those conversations? Delaware Delivers is this hashtag that is at the heart of the this sort of public communications effort that Delaware's team has right now to be making sure that this storytelling is discoverable for all of us. So while there's lots more to that campaign, and that Kathy will speak to even at the end, all the different things that the state has been doing, this communications effort is centered on this hashtag. And we're going to actually hop into Twitter now and take a look at what's been happening with Delaware Delivers, because there's nothing that I can, show you in slides that is nearly as exciting as what's happening live in Twitter right now. I'm going to unshare, hop on over into Twitter for just half a second, and exit full screen. There we go. Okay, back to sharing and into Twitter. So here I am in Twitter, and I'm logged in as the Knowledge Matters campaign, which is an initiative of standards work that actually the Knowledge Matters campaign visited 4 Delaware districts this year and visited Laurel a couple years back. So that campaign has been party to the storytelling. And in fact, if you hop on over to the profile and you're looking for something to amplify, the pinned tweet of the Knowledge Matters campaign right now is a thread where you can go head on down and see some of what we were seeing when we got to Seaford, and when we got to Cape, when we got to Brandywine, and there's Tammy, the amazing principal at Claymont Elementary. So there's something you can amplify. But the biggest thing that I wanted to spend our time on is making sure you know the search and you are one with the search. So let's go take a look at what's happening. And if I start to type, this has been trending enough that there it is. It pops up right there for me. Let's see what's happening around Delaware Delivers. So first, we're able to see that, the department is talking about people who are talking about this work and sharing a wonderful piece from Rodell that just does such a nice job of putting a spotlight on the state's work right now. We can see a recent webinar about these 4 districts. Ashley led us off and was alongside his colleagues. And we can see Curriculum Matters talking about that work in Delaware. We can see Standards Work amplifying. We can see Janice talking about it. And I'm not going to overspend time here because we could go on for a while. There's a lot of buzz that's been building around what's happening in Delaware. And you can get in there and, in fact, again, upvote these things and make sure that they're seen by more voices just by clicking that like button or that retweet. And it can be just as simple as that. Of course, I would absolutely encourage you to also, get into the authoring and add your voice to it. And so you can get in there and you can actually say, take some of these wonderful shares, add your own voice and share them. Retweet with comment is such a great way of getting the word out because you can kind of just take somebody else's content and give it your own narrative, right? So what a wonderful to And so I can just, a quick 1 sentence, what a wonderful window. I hope someone reads this, we can throw on. We can throw on a couple of those hashtags to help people following those Curriculum Matters conversation, the Delaware Delivers conversation. We can tag the authors because this lets Rodell know that we read it and we shared it. Tweet. Off it goes into the world and there's more of a conversation. But let's go ahead and follow them. And if you do one thing, again, just the liking and just the retweeting is great. And, it's not just some of the organizations we mentioned that are sharing. It's a wonderful way to even get following some of these educators that are telling these stories. You're not going to find better marketing for high quality curriculum than this tweet right here. Principal Becky Newbert in Seaford talking about how we have students that are using a knowledge building curriculum. They're studying ancient Greece, and then they're getting out the snow poles to go do their own javelining in the backyard as part of summer school. I am sold. If I'm not using high quality curriculum, I need to know more about that work. It's just awesome. So back on over into our slides. Hopefully that gives you a nice sense of how to find that that really powerful Delaware Delivers conversation. And please do spend some time before bedtime, grocery line, over coffee, or when we hop off the webinar, making sure that you can see that. I was going to take a super fast minute just to give you a quick window into some of the other conversations that are worth knowing in social media. So if you're going to go that layer deeper, know that beyond Delaware Delivers, there are some of these national conversations that have been connected to curriculum and instruction. The Curriculum Matters Professional Learning Network, of which Janice and Ashley are members, as are a few other of the Delaware leaders, Jenny, Kelly, Lavina. This group uses the Curriculum Matters hashtag to connect to their conversation, which you just saw me use. Materials Matter is the hashtag used by Ed Reports, so you'll sometimes see Materials Matter posts too. Knowledge Matters is the hashtag used by the Knowledge Matters campaign that I mentioned before, and here's a little glimpse of, if you go search Knowledge Matters and Delaware Delivers in a pair, you're going to find all kinds of posts from the school tour that visited those 4 Delaware districts this year, and this is just a quick glimpse of some of the goodness that you'll find. That hashtag is also used and amplified by those who've been just passionate about the opportunity to bring knowledge-rich curricula into schools, aided very much by the popularity of Natalie Wexler's really highly recommended Knowledge Gap book. And then there's a state's leading conversation. The CCSSO has been active in encouraging this use of high quality instructional materials, particularly with the 12 states in the IMPD group, including Delaware. And so you'll sometimes see them give voice to this work, and they are typically using the state's leading hashtag. So those are all hashtags that you can both be aware of, talk into by tweeting and tagging states leading if you're talking about your own work as a state, but also those that you can listen into. So we did our Twitter search. We found Delaware Delivers. I'd encourage you all to be, again, taking your time in Twitter and seeing what else is out there, because we've only scratched the surface. But in fact, we're actually going to shift now to some of the storytelling opportunity that comes naturally when we have a chance to hear leaders whose stories need telling. And no one tops that list more than Ashley Giska. I loved yesterday's webinar where we got to hear his story, and I'm just delighted by a chance to hear from Ashley again. And here's where, again, I encourage you to get out that phone if it's near you, take your couple of screenshots. We're going to listen to Ashley do some sharing, and then we'll actually share a little bit of Ashley sharing as we close at the end to give you a sense of how naturally webinars give us a great vehicle for doing some of that storytelling. Because I promise you, Ashley's got some amazing stories. And I'm going to share just really quickly some of my own favorite tactics for sharing from a webinar. Number one, the screenshot. So when Ashley shares really interesting thoughts from some of his slides, and you're like, look at those bullet points, those are awesome. Taking a quick screenshot of what's on your screen. I've seen people do it with their camera phone, just holding up the camera phone. I personally use a Mac, so Command Shift 3 takes a screenshot. Presto, I have one. Instant graphic for social media. Posts with graphics or videos get 4 times the engagement of posts with just text. So, by all means, you can be capturing some of that content as we go. And then I am not beyond holding up my phone and pressing record when someone shares an awesome story in social media. There's no better way to share it. So get your phones ready, get your notes ready, because now it's time for us to hear from Ashley.
Well, Karen, thank you very much. I've got quite a bit to live up to after that introduction. I'll do my level best. So the best thing, everyone, about being in the Delaware school system and going through this training right now is that there is no, my story, we're going to share that as an example, but HQIM in our state has been so deftly, adopted by so many districts, and there's been such great outcomes that the opportunities are abound. For us, just a couple of things. Let me give some context around this, and then I'll jump through the slides, Karen. But when I think about tweeting, and I should tweet more. That's what I always think to myself. But when I think about it, I think to myself, what's the angle? What am I trying to put out there to the world? And I'm going to show you a couple of slides that sort of tell our story a little bit about what's been happening in Laurel over the past 5 years. But a couple of angles that I think are really important are, number one, we've been working toward building high quality instructional materials for all of our students across grade levels for 5 years now. And the most exciting thing now is in both ELA and mathematics, from kindergarten through 11th grade in all of our schools, we have high quality materials in front of our students. So that's a story right there, is that, and 2 of those years of the past 5 years have been during the pandemic, and we've not allowed that to slow us down. We've just kept moving forward with this goal that we had to make sure all of our classrooms in ELA and math had these type of materials for our students. And you can see on the screen right now that, that effort that we put in beginning back in 2016-17 yielded some pretty tremendous results along the way. And I think, if you look here where there's a couple of examples of data that we've shared pretty widely, over the course of time. But here's our ELA 6 scores. And you can see, we're starting at a 33% proficiency back in 2015 and moving all the way up to 49% proficiency. And during some of that time, and many of you on this call will remember, Laurel's middle school was under priority status, which, for those of you that don't know that are on the call, is essentially, where our performance was so low and below the standard that was set for us that there had to be a lot of interventions, and we had to work towards, with the Department of Education and other partners, building a system that would get us out of that achievement slump. And we did that in 2 years. They give 5 years for priority schools to exit, and we were able to hit all of our targets in just 2 years, which is, it's a pretty remarkable thing. And if you look nationwide, and I've done this, the priority schools, they had different names across different systems in different states, but there were a very low percentage of priority schools, or whatever the moniker was for different states, that actually exited their targets after 5 years. So to do it after 2 years was really something remarkable. And we're going to keep pushing. That's something that that we want to keep doing. And the other story, and you can go to the next slide, Karen. But sort of the other story that I think emerges here is that with all of that happening, that's all been wonderful. The last 2 years have been really hard to determine what our growth was going to be. But right now we sort of stand, and it's all districts really. We're on this precipice right now where we have been given unprecedented resources. We've been given, right from the United States Department of Education, go out there and innovate, make great things happen for your kids with these monies. We're ready to keep pushing forward and see what comes next. Look what we've been able to do with the resources we had. And now think about how much that's been amplified by things like the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act, that type of infusion into our schools. If it's funneled toward high quality instructional materials, I think you're going to see some really exciting things nationwide. So, I'm excited about that. That's another angle. Here's our ELA scores, and you can kind of see, starting at 28% proficiency, and as we, move through the years, we are all the way up to 59%, which is of course above the state average in 2019, which, for us, I want every student in the state of Delaware to succeed at their maximum ability, but for us to come from such a place of struggle and to be able to bring our students up to that proficiency level, 68 in 2018, that was a really remarkable thing. It made us feel very empowered by the work that we were doing with our teachers. And, this is something I talked about in the webinar yesterday, but I'll reiterate it. One of the things that's really important is teacher efficacy. And this journey really built up the confidence in our teachers to really take risks and do great things in their classrooms. And that was something that was wholly not there when things were struggling. And I know that there are, schools and districts in the state of Delaware right now that are in the place that we were at, that we're struggling, and there's just not a lot of belief that they can turn it around. But I'm telling you, they can. And it just takes something to get that momentum moving forward. And for us, it was this journey towards HQIM. And I think that if we can encourage that in every district in our state, and certainly across the country, other districts can feel that same momentum build and really bring that teacher efficacy and confidence up and do great things. You go to the next slide, Karen. So just some more stories. 8th grade math was really our biggest success story over the past few years, coming all the way from 21% proficiency. Some of you, I don't think this slide's on here, but our 5th grade math scores were actually 6% proficiency in that year. But for 8th grade, you can see we went pretty considerably into the stratosphere and performed relatively consistently between 2017 and 2019, high above the state average, with a lot of success. And that was something we're really proud of. 8th grade was a year that we put a lot of focus and resources on. We really focused our professional development. We began our high quality instructional materials journey in mathematics in our middle school, specifically because we were worried. We sat down and looked at data and we said, oh my goodness, something happens around that 8th grade year, that 7th grade year, and then the students just continually fall further and further behind in mathematics performance, on our state assessments. So we put our resources there. We began our high quality instructional materials there in the middle school, that journey back in 2016 or 2017 for them. And you can see that we had a pretty dramatic, result in 8th grade. I believe 2017, that was amongst the highest performance, in the state as far as students. And again, building a lot of momentum, building a lot of efficacy. And it's sort of like a snowball rolling downhill. When this started to happen, other grade levels in our district who were not having the success in mathematics didn't have the materials to be successful, didn't have the conceptual knowledge building ability, which comes through professional learning, they would see what was happening in the middle school and they'd get inspired. They'd be like, oh my gosh, our 8th graders, are performing at such a high level. What do you guys, we want some of that. Let's go. And then when an alpha pilot came along, our teachers were willing to take that risk. I mean, we began with illustrative mathematics in the elementary school. The very first year they were doing the alpha pilot. And our teachers worked through the alpha pilot. They worked through the beta pilot during COVID. And all that time, our elementary school teachers are giving feedback to IM and Learn Zillion. And now this year, when we go back to school, all in person, it's going to be amazing. When we go back to school, version 1 of IM for elementary school is being officially launched, and our teachers are going to see a lot of their feedback reflected in that. And that's been a bonus for them too. So go ahead to the next slide, Karen. So this is something, we've shared. There was another webinar that I did with Curriculum Matters where we brought on, a couple of Laurel educators to just really talk about, some of the experiences in their classroom, and sharing stories like this or quotes from teachers, really powerful, just because, these 2 quotes really exemplify for us 2 things that were a big deal when we brought, bookworms into our classrooms. Sarah Kemp there, who spoke on that webinar with us, and you can go back and find that archived. She works with our L students at Laurel Elementary School. And, she began to see with her groups of students the powerful impact that the students that were having stronger foundation in decoding and phonics, as she says there, but also building a love for reading. And she was seeing that with their L students. And that was really important for us to really try to figure out, because at the time, when we began to bring bookworms in, one thing that many of you may not know about Delaware, but we were one of 2 of the fastest growing L populations in the state. I believe it was us and Milford at the time. So when we were making this decision, like, what do we bring in? Our L population was a huge factor in that. And we had went and visited Seaford, and we had seen some of the success they were having with their push-in model, using bookworms there. And so we came back. So to hear from Sarah, who is just a rock star in our district as far as educating kids, come back and say, this is changing the outcomes for our L students, it's very vindicating for us, because we knew that was something we had to address. And then, of course, you can see from Aaron, who is a classroom teacher in 3rd grade, the biggest reason to do this is consistency. All across the board, teachers are being asked to go out and produce curriculum documents or fix bad curriculum. And that journey's taken them to Teachers Pay Teachers. It's taken them to Pinterest. It's taken them every which way but loose. And the result of that is 2 things. 1, teachers are tired and not focused on helping individual kids learn. And 2, you're getting a very inconsistent product that oftentimes is over scaffolded, oftentimes lacks the rigor, density that we need in order to challenge students to grow. So she's talking a little bit about that. So sharing some quotes from teachers that exemplify the ideas you want to put out there can be a really tremendous thing to do. Next slide. So, our outcomes go well beyond proficiency. This is something we talked about last night. We could have talked about it all night because, obviously the outcomes are compelling in Delaware. There's a lot of districts that are getting good turnaround scores by implementing high quality materials. But if you go to those school districts, or if you take some time to talk to any of the administrators or the teachers that are involved in that process, you begin to see things like this. Schools reporting that kids love, reading so much, and it's at the heart of their instruction, or that a genuine culture of literacy or reading is developing in their schools, about seeing rich discussions. And I'll tell you what, one of the people that is best at this, because Karen brought up the idea of putting out their images with your tweets. And I'll tell you what, obviously, you have to think about, well, have students all signed off and so on and so forth, all of the legal things that go into making sure we can put that stuff on the internet. But in our district, we take care of that. And our superintendent, Sean Larimore, he loves going into a classroom and taking pictures of kids highly engaged and then tweeting about it, on Twitter. And those get a ton of traction, just seeing kids doing wonderful things. And the traction that he gets with those are not just other educators, but literally members of our community that are just so happy to see what's happening in our schools, that are disconnected. And that, that goes a long way to push it as well. Yeah. So at any rate, I think I've said enough, Karen, but those are some of the stories that have happened in Laurel. Those are some of the angles, that we can, put this out there. Oh, I didn't realize this was in here. Sorry about that. So, the last thing I'll talk about, and I'll turn it over to you guys, but this came up again in our webinar yesterday is equity. We let's just talk, the last 2 years here in Laurel were very difficult because COVID hit our community particularly hard. I mean, it hit everywhere hard. It hit the state hard. But our community had some of the highest community spread, some of the worst hospitalization numbers. Just it was a dramatic impact. And as our teachers fought through this, and they fought through it valiantly, and I was so proud of them to try to, so they tried every which way they could to make sure that the kids of Laurel were educated, and did a great job. But what was exposed was the inequities in our community. And it was also exposed, we felt a little bit like we had not been focused on this enough. It's been something that's in the back of our mind, or something that we said we were focusing on. But when the rubber hit the road, we realized we didn't have the things in place to make sure equity was real for all of our students. And as we stepped back and looked at it, we realized one of the most important equity moves we can make is bringing high quality instructional materials into every single classroom. And that's going to accomplish a lot of things. First thing is, it's going to give every student the opportunity to work with authentic grade level texts, and a lot of texts. And that was one thing that we wanted to have happen. We wanted to make sure that we were frequently monitoring for progress, and we were having real opportunities for differentiated instruction. And that's something that was built into these programs we started to bring in. We wanted to make sure that all students were having a consistent, rigorous experience in their classrooms, as opposed to sort of learning by lottery, is a phrase that we had, here in the district. That when you don't have a strong system of materials, when you don't have strong HQIM in place, it's a little bit of where you end up on the schedule. That determines what your year is going to be like. And everyone worked really hard, and every teacher came from a place of love and wanting to teach kids and help them learn to the best of their ability. But when you've got 10 different people playing 10 different instruments, it's not always going to be a symphony. And that's where we found ourselves. So, the other thing was emphasis on vocabulary, partner reading. Some of these practices that we're going to support our L students just became, all that much more important as our population grew. And that population was one of the hardest populations we had connecting with, our migrant students during COVID. We sent all of our books home, and we had hundreds and hundreds of texts that we had bought, thousands across the district for these programs, and we just sent them into the houses, knowing we full well probably wouldn't get them back. But these are some of the things we did. But here's the stuff, all of those moves that allowed us to achieve at least a start toward a real equity in our district were only possible because of our HQIM journey. Like, that's what made it possible, for us. And there's a lot more we can do in this, and will. But that one move led to a lot of outcomes and a lot of leverage when we, tried to make this happen. So excited about all that. # Delaware Delivers.
See, I told y'all, Ashley has some amazing stories that, if only we could get, every educator across the country on this journey, and hearing Ashley's stories to be able to bring us on this journey. So let's not miss an opportunity to share those stories. So I'm going to hop into Twitter, and I'm actually going to share a little bit from this time now. I was taking my screenshots because that gives me a nice assist in getting out there and storytelling. But also wanted to remind everybody that the chat is open. And if you have any questions for Ashley about his work, or about the social media things that we talked about, for Janice about her work, or for Kathy and the team at Delaware, then don't be shy. We're here. Oh, get myself out of the deck. Okay. So, so sharing my screen again and taking us back into Twitter. I love webinars. Somebody has made content for us. Someone made slides. Someone prepared things to say, right? So, so in taking my screenshots there, I point you to, if you don't have a great screenshot, you can always use this embedded. goodness, this embedded GIF library. So I could cheer what Ashley's saying, and I'm sure you'll see somebody, Janice is great at this, at tweeting with fun GIFs. I could say, you know, what Ashley was saying made me so excited. I'm going to go find an excited GIF and attach that and shout out Ashley's work that way. But that's not the direction I'm going here. This afternoon, today, I want to take some of the amazing content that Ashley shared. And I'm going to go in. I took too many screenshots, so it may just take a second for me to find my favorites. I think this should be a good one. So, you know, when Ashley's sitting there talking about these outcomes that you know, go beyond proficiency, here I am. I've attached my image. There's so much said right here, right? So, I'm going to tag Ashley. Loving the opportunity to hear from Ashley about the work. And Laurel happens to be one of those rare districts who, if they're in Twitter, I haven't been able to find their hashtag. Ashley, am I right that Laurel is not in Twitter?
Well, it's just our leadership. We used to have one, and now we just kind of do it as individual leaders. It's at Super SUPT Larimore, which is our Dr. Larimore, our superintendent. So he's kind of the official tweeter of the district. Is tweeter? That's not right. That sounds wrong.
Tweeter is fine. I think Tweeter is good. Not the work in.
I think you need one more R in Larimore, and then you'll find the right guy.
There we go. And there, and
that's it.
We've got it. Thank you. Thank you for being my spell checker. Work with. This is my secret when I am typing and you all can see it. I'm so typo prone. So thanks for keeping me honest on the spelling too, if I have any others. From work with high quality curriculum. And the team using my shortcuts, hat tip, my HT for hat tip, because I only have so many characters to work with. See, I knew there'd be another typo. There always is. And
I'll say, you know, while Karen is doing this, you know, those of you that are, you know, at the Department of Education and whatever your role is, it really does bring a lot of, you know, pride and good feels when, you know, all of a sudden you get that ding on your phone and it says, hey, Department of Education mentioned you on Twitter. You know, that really does, you know, just because sometimes, you know, I think that you all don't give yourself enough credit for your leadership. I mean, you guys are inspiring and you've supported this work in the state. You know, so, you know, join that conversation because it is inspiring to us to know that, you know, we're being noticed by our state leadership. It really is. It gets you excited.
I love that. Love that. Love that. I mean, you know, Janice, I don't know if you want to chime in at all about, you know, the ways that matters to you. So there's our tweet. It's out in the world. I've got other screenshots. Keep an eye on this thread because I promise you it will grow once we leave. When it grows, quick pro tip, how do you write a Twitter thread? You only have 280 characters. You just reply to yourself and there your thread groweth. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing so I can pull up the slides and Kathy can help bring us home.
Thanks so much, Karen, for this great session. And thanks, Ashley and Janice and all of our presenters today. What great information and what great stories. Ashley, the Laurel story is always so inspirational for us. And you're definitely getting noticed. And we're, you know, thanks to the Knowledge Matters campaign and the Standards Works team for just helping us from the department you know, build that story and build that knowledge out in the field about why this work is so important. And elevating your stories to help build knowledge across the state around how this really can support outcomes for not just changing teacher practice, but changing student outcomes. So thank you for all of your work, Ashley, and your support with the work that's happening across the state. So just want to take one more pause and check of the chat box to see if we have any questions. I don't see any actual questions. Just some comments. Okay. And just Karen, if you can go back one more slide before we hit the last slide. Thanks. Just a reminder to check Digital Delaware. We will have the posting to this recording, and all of the What's Up Wednesdays sessions will be there. Hopefully in the next few days, all 4 sessions will be there. We do have the blog post from the Knowledge Matters campaign for Seaford, Cape Henlopen, and Brandywine. We have some fact sheets around high quality instructional materials and high quality professional learning. We also have a Tier 1 planning guide with recommendations for how to really support Tier 1 instruction. We know that we have new MTSS regulations rolling out this year, and we've, from a department, really decided to focus on Tier 1 instruction as the core tenet in those MTSS regulations this year. So those pieces are there to really support our districts. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And if you have questions or are interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development Work Group. We are always here to support you through this work. And if you have specific questions, you can reach out to delaware.delivers@doe.k12.de.us. Thanks so much, everyone. We appreciate your time.